I don't care if he has a boarding pass. I'm the senior vice president of this airline, and I want that seat. Get him off my plane, now." Those were the last words Preston Holloway said before he lost everything. He thought he was just bullying a quiet passenger in seat 1A, a man in a faded hoodie who didn't look like he belonged in first class. He didn't know that the man he was snapping his fingers at was Ella Cross, the shadowy financial genius who had just quietly acquired 51% of the company's stock that morning. By the time the plane landed, Preston wouldn't just be fired. He would be the face of the biggest PR disaster in Wall Street history. Here is the story of how one arrogant executive tried to upgrade himself and ended up crashing the entire airline. The cabin of the Aerolux Boeing 787 Dreamliner smelled of fresh leather and expensive champagne, a scent specifically engineered to comfort the ultra-wealthy. In seat 1A, the most coveted spot on the plane, sat Ella Cross. Ella didn't look like the typical clientele for Aerolux's royal class. He wasn't wearing a Brioni suit or flashing a Patek Philippe watch. He was dressed in a charcoal grey hoodie, comfortable joggers, and a pair of worn-in sneakers. He had noise-cancelling headphones over his ears and was typing furiously on a battered laptop. To the untrained eye, he looked like a college student who had lucked into a lottery ticket upgrade. To the trained eye, however, the details would have been alarming. The battered laptop was a military-grade encrypted workstation. The worn sneakers were limited-run prototypes worth more than a mid-sized sedan. And Ella himself wasn't a student. He was the founder of Cross-Grid Logistics, the massive infrastructure firm that quietly kept half the global economy moving. But Ella preferred invisibility. He hated the spotlight. He just wanted to get from New York to London to sign the final papers on a deal that had been 6 months in the making. He took a sip of water, adjusted his screen, and exhaled. The flight was due to depart in 15 minutes. The cabin was mostly empty, save for an elderly couple in row 2. Peace. Then the storm arrived. "No, I don't care what the app says, Brenda. I am boarding now, and I expect the cabin to be prepped." The voice boomed from the jet bridge, loud enough to cut through Ella's noise-cancelling headphones. A moment later, a man stormed onto the plane. Preston Holloway was a caricature of corporate arrogance. Dressed in a navy pinstripe suit that screamed, "Tailored in Milan," with slicked-back hair and a jawline he held high enough to check for rain, Preston was the newly appointed Senior Vice President of Customer Experience for Aerolux. He was 45, ambitious, and operated under the delusion that the world existed solely to serve him. He wasn't traveling for business. He was heading to London for a weekend golf retreat with potential investors, a trip he had disguised as a site inspection to expense it to the company. Preston dropped his heavy leather carry-on onto seat 1D across the aisle and glared around the cabin. His eyes landed on Ella in 1A. Preston's lip curled. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number, not bothering to lower his voice. "Yeah, I'm on. But listen, the cabin configuration is annoying me. I specifically requested the bulkhead window, 1A. It's the only seat with the extra 3 inches of leg room for the recliner. No, someone is in it. Some kid in a hoodie, probably a non-rev or a miles upgrade. Hang on." Preston hung up and snapped his fingers at the flight attendant, who was busy prepping the galley. "You, come here." The flight attendant, a young woman named Eloise, who had been flying for only 2 years, froze. She recognized him immediately. Preston Holloway's face had been on the cover of the internal company newsletter just last week with the headline, "Cutting Costs, Raising Standards." He was known as the Hatchet because he fired crews for minor uniform infractions. "Mr. Holloway," Eloise stammered, rushing over. "Welcome aboard. It's an honor to have you flying with—" "Save the script," Preston cut her off, waving a hand dismissively. "Why is there a passenger in my seat?" Eloise blinked, confused. She looked at her manifest tablet. "Sir, you're booked in 1D. Seat 1A is assigned to Mr. Cross." Preston looked at Ella, who hadn't looked up from his laptop. The disrespect irked him. Preston was used to people scrambling when he entered a room. "I don't care what the computer says," Preston hissed, leaning in close to Eloise. "I have a bad back. I need the bulkhead recliner. And I am the senior vice president of this airline. Do I need to explain the hierarchy to you? I fly where I want. Move him." Eloise's face went pale. "Sir, the flight is fully booked. If I move him, I'd have to downgrade him to business or economy, and that requires—" "I don't care if you have to put him in the cargo hold," Preston snapped. "Look at him." He gestured loudly toward Ella. "He's wearing a hoodie. He's obviously a mileage upgrader or an employee traveling on a buddy pass. We don't prioritize freeloaders over executives. Get him out of 1A. Put him in— I don't know. Find a jump seat. Just get it done before I call your base manager and have you debadged before we take off." Eloise swallowed hard. Her hands were shaking. She had a mortgage. She had a sick mother. She couldn't lose this job. The fear of Preston Holloway outweighed her training. "Yes, Mr. Holloway," she whispered. She smoothed her skirt, took a deep breath, and walked over to 1A. Ella was deep in the code of a merger agreement when he sensed the presence beside him. He paused his typing and slid one earphone back. "Mr. Cross?" Eloise asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Yes?" Ella's voice was calm, deep, and polite. He turned to look at her, his eyes dark and intelligent. "I'm so sorry to disturb you, sir," Eloise said, glancing nervously back at Preston, who was standing in the aisle with his arms crossed, tapping his foot impatiently. "But there has been an error with the seat assignments. I'm afraid I'm going to need you to move." Ella raised an eyebrow. "An error? I checked in online yesterday. My boarding pass says 1A. I paid full fare." "I understand, sir," Eloise said, sweating now. "But it seems there was a system glitch regarding the availability of the first-class cabin. This seat is actually reserved for a senior airline executive who requires it for operational reasons." Ella looked past her at Preston. Preston didn't look away. He held Ella's gaze with a smirk of pure condescension, then pointedly looked at his watch. "Operational reasons," Ella repeated, his tone dry. "You mean the man in the Italian suit who just boarded and demanded this seat because he wants the extra legroom?" Eloise flinched. "Sir, please. Mr. Holloway is a very important figure at Aerolux. We really need to accommodate him. I can find you a seat in business class. It's still very comfortable." Ella closed his laptop slowly. The soft click sounded like a gunshot in the quiet cabin. "Let me get this straight," Ella said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously quiet. "I paid $12,000 for this ticket. I selected this seat specifically because I have work to do and I require privacy. And you want to downgrade me without a refund, I assume, because your boss wants to sit by the window?" It's not like that," Eloise lied, her eyes pleading with him to just comply so she wouldn't get fired. It's a protocol issue. Priority is given to executive staff during operational travel. I know the regulations of the FAA and the Department of Transportation regarding involuntary bumping, Ella said. He didn't raise his voice, but the authority in it was unmistakable. You cannot move a revenue passenger for a non-revenue employee, regardless of rank, once they have boarded. That is a federal violation. Preston, hearing this, scoffed loud enough to be heard. He stomped over, pushing past Eloise. "Listen here, pal," Preston snarled, looming over Ella. "You might know how to read a Wikipedia page on airline law, but you don't know how the real world works. I run this fleet. This represents my company. You are a guest in my house. Now you can grab your little backpack and move to seat 12F back in business, or I can have security drag you off for being disruptive. Which one do you want?" Ella looked up at Preston. He didn't blink. He didn't look intimidated. He looked bored. "I am not moving," Ella said simply. "And I would advise you, Mr. Holloway, to sit in your assigned seat and let the crew do their job. You are creating a liability." Preston's face turned a violent shade of red. His ego, already inflated to the bursting point, couldn't handle the rejection. A nobody in a hoodie telling him about liability. "Disruptive passenger," Preston shouted, turning to Eloise. "You heard him. He's refusing crew instructions. He's being aggressive. He threatened me." "I did no such thing," Ella said calmly. "He threatened me," Preston yelled, playing to the imaginary audience. "Get the gate agent. Get the police. I want this man off my plane immediately. I am not flying with a security threat." Eloise looked like she was about to cry. "Mr. Holloway, maybe we can—" "Do it!" Preston screamed, his spit flying. "Or you're fired right now. Badge on the table. Gone." Eloise flinched as if she'd been struck. She looked at Ella with apologetic, terrified eyes. I have to call the gate agent, sir. Please." Ella sighed. He reached into his pocket. For a second, Preston flinched, perhaps thinking Ella was pulling a weapon. But Ella only pulled out a sleek, black smartphone. He tapped the screen once, starting a voice recording. Then he looked at Preston. "You've just made the most expensive mistake of your life, Preston," Ella said. Preston laughed, a cruel, barking laugh. "Oh, you're recording me. Go ahead. Put it on Twitter. See if I care. I have a PR team that scrubs guys like you from the internet before breakfast. You're done." Preston turned his back on Ella and sat down in 1A, literally sitting on the armrest, hovering over Ella, trying to physically crowd him out. "Get the cops," Preston ordered Eloise. "Tell them we have a hostile male in first class, refusing to deplane." Eloise ran to the galley phone. Ella didn't move. He didn't argue. He simply opened a new window on his laptop. He wasn't opening Twitter. He was opening the direct terminal to the New York Stock Exchange. He began to type. 2 airport police officers, heavy with gear and looking weary from a long shift, squeezed down the narrow aisle of the Dreamliner. The lead officer, a burly man with a nameplate that read Officer Miller, looked between the immaculate Preston Holloway and the calm figure of Ella Cross. "What seems to be the problem here?" Miller asked, his voice booming slightly in the confined space. Preston stepped forward immediately, blocking Miller's view of Ella. He put on his best, concerned executive face, a mask he had perfected over years of boardroom manipulation. "Officer, thank God you're here," Preston said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was still loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. "I'm Preston Holloway, Senior Vice President of Aerolux. This passenger in 1A," he jabbed a finger toward Ella, "has been belligerent since he boarded. He refused to follow crew instructions regarding seating assignments. He became verbally abusive toward the flight attendant. And when I tried to intervene as a company representative, he made a threatening gesture. He implied he would take me out." Eloise, standing in the galley, gasped softly. It was a lie. A blatant, malicious lie. She opened her mouth to speak, to defend the quiet man in the hoodie, but Preston shot her a look. It was a look of pure menace, a silent promise that if she said one word, her career was over. She clamped her mouth shut, tears welling in her eyes, and looked at the floor. Officer Miller frowned. He looked at Ella. "Sir? Is this true?" Ella hadn't moved. He hadn't panicked. He slowly closed his laptop and placed it into his leather bag. He stood up, towering over Preston by a good 2 inches, though he didn't use his size to intimidate. He just radiated a cold, absolute calm. "Officer," Ella said, his voice steady, "I have a valid boarding pass for this seat. I did not threaten anyone. This man wants my seat because it has extra legroom, and he is using your authority to facilitate a personal upgrade." "He's lying!" Preston shouted, throwing his hands up. "See, he's contradicting an airline executive. That's insubordination on a federal aircraft. I want him removed, now, or do I need to call the commissioner?" Officer Miller sighed. He hated these calls. He probably suspected Preston was full of it. The guy in the suit reeked of entitlement. But the law was tricky. If the airline representative, Preston, formally requested a passenger's removal for safety reasons, the police had to enforce it first and ask questions later. They couldn't risk a mid-air incident. "Sir," Miller said to Ella, his tone apologetic but firm, "the airline has the right to refuse transport. If Mr. Holloway here says you're off the flight, you're off the flight. You need to grab your bags and come with us. We can sort this out at the gate." "If I leave," Ella said, locking eyes with Preston, "this plane leaves without me, and the consequences of that will be irreversible." "Is that a threat?" Preston screeched. "Officer, he just threatened to sabotage the plane. Irreversible consequences. Take him down." Miller's hand drifted toward his taser. "Sir, grab your bag. Now, don't make this hard." Ella held Preston's gaze for 3 long seconds. In that silence, the air in the cabin felt heavy, charged with invisible lightning. Then, Ella nodded once. "Very well," Ella said. He picked up his bag. He didn't argue. He didn't scream. He walked into the aisle. As he passed Eloise, she whispered, "I'm so sorry." Ella paused, looking at her kindly. "Don't be. You're just a pawn. The king falls today." He walked off the plane, flanked by the police officers. Preston watched him go, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. He turned to the rest of the cabin, where a few passengers were looking at him with disgust. "Sorry about the delay, folks," Preston announced, clapping his hands together. "Just keeping the skies safe. Safety is Aerolux's #1 priority." He threw his heavy bag into the overhead bin of seat 1A, then collapsed into the leather chair, stretching his legs out fully. "Eloise," he barked, "get me a scotch, double, neat, and tell the pilot to push back. We're burning daylight." As the jet bridge retracted and the heavy door thumped shut, Preston Holloway felt like the king of the world. He had won. He always won. He had no idea that he had just signed his own death warrant. Ella Cross stood at the gate podium in the terminal, watching the massive Boeing 787 push back from the glass window. The gate agents were looking at him nervously, whispering behind their hands. The police officers, satisfied that Ella wasn't actually a violent maniac, had let him go with a warning to contact customer service for a refund. Ella didn't want a refund. He wanted blood. He sat down on one of the uncomfortable metal chairs in the waiting area, isolated from the crowd. He opened his laptop again. The airport Wi-Fi was slow, so he tethered the connection to his encrypted satellite phone. He logged into the secure portal of Cross-Grid Logistics. First, he pulled up the live stock data for Aerolux, ticker ARLX. It was trading at $45.20 a share. The company was heavily leveraged, dependent on a massive new round of financing that was supposed to be signed in London tomorrow. That was the deal Ella was flying to finalize. Cross-Grid was the silent guarantor for the loan that would keep Aerolux flying for the next 5 years. Without that signature, Aerolux was insolvent. Ella picked up his phone and dialed a number. It rang once. "Ella." The voice on the other end was rough and elderly. It was Arthur Sterling, the chairman of the board for Aerolux. Arthur was a good man, but he was old and had lost control of the vipers in his company, vipers like Preston. "Arthur," Ella said, "I'm not coming to London." "What?" Arthur's voice spiked with panic. "Ella, you have to. The banks are waiting. The liquidity deal needs your signature by 9 a.m. London time. If you don't sign, the credit lines freeze. We won't be able to buy fuel." "I was on the plane, Arthur," Ella said, watching the 787 taxi toward the runway. "I was in seat 1A, but your senior VP, Preston Halloway, decided he wanted my seat. He had me removed by police. He claimed I was a security threat." There was a long silence on the line. He did what?" "He kicked the majority shareholder and the sole financier of your debt off the plane so he could stretch his legs," Ella said coldly. "I am pulling the deal, Arthur." No, Ella, please. This is a misunderstanding. I'll fire him. I'll fire him right now," Arthur pleaded. "Don't tank the company over one idiot." "It's not just one idiot, Arthur. It's the culture that allows him to exist," Ella said. "But I'm a reasonable man. I won't bankrupt the airline. Yet. However, I am going to teach Mr. Halloway a lesson in economics." "What are you going to do?" Arthur asked, terrified. "I'm initiating a hostile sell-off of my current holdings, and I'm releasing a press statement via Cross-Grid in 5 minutes," Ella said. "The statement will read that Cross-Grid has identified significant ethical and leadership failures within Aerolux executive management and is withdrawing all support. Ella, that will crash the stock. It'll drop 50% in an hour." "I know," Ella said. "And since Mr. Halloway is paid largely in stock options, which vest based on share price stability, he's about to become very poor, very quickly. Do not warn him, Arthur. If you warn him, I bankrupt the whole airline. Let him land in London to the ashes of his career." "Okay," Arthur whispered. "Okay. Do what you have to do." Ella hung up. He turned to his laptop. His fingers flew across the keys. He drafted the press release. It was short, brutal, and vague enough to cause maximum panic on Wall Street. Press release. Cross-Grid Logistics withdraws $2 billion. Financing proposal for Aerolux Airlines, citing irreconcilable leadership failures. He hovered his mouse over the Publish button. Outside the window, the Aerolux plane roared down the runway and lifted into the sky. Preston was up there, sipping his scotch, probably laughing. Ella clicked the button. Almost instantly, the graph on his second screen reacted. The ARLX stock ticker, which had been a steady green line, hiccuped. Then it dipped. Then it nosedived. In New York, trading algorithms picked up the keyword withdraws financing. The sell orders started firing in milliseconds. $45.20, $41, $38.50. Ella watched the numbers tumble. He picked up his phone again and dialed his personal broker. "Short it," Ella said. "Short Aerolux with everything available in the discretionary fund." "Sir?" the broker asked. "The market is already reacting. It's risky." "Do it. It's going to single digits," Ella said. He sat back and watched the chaos unfold on the screen. The financial news networks were already breaking in. "Flash crash at Aerolux," the headline screamed. Meanwhile, 30,000 feet in the air, the Wi-Fi on the Dreamliner finally kicked in. Preston Holloway, feeling relaxed and warm from the whiskey, decided to check his email. He expected to see praise from his team, or maybe a golf itinerary. He unlocked his phone. It exploded with notifications, text messages, missed calls, news alerts. "WTF is happening?" Text from his assistant. "Margin call imminent on your personal portfolio." Auto alert from his bank. "Stock crashing. Call me." Text from the CEO. Preston frowned, confused. What the hell? He opened his brokerage app. He liked to check his net worth daily. He had about $4 million tied up in Aerolux stock options, his retirement, his boat money, his status. He stared at the screen. The number wasn't green anymore. It was bright, bloody red. ARLX, $22.15, minus 48%. His portfolio value had halved in 20 minutes. "No," Preston whispered. "That's a glitch." He refreshed the app. ARLX, $18.40, minus 59%. "No," he said louder. He hurriedly opened the news app. The top headline punched him in the gut. "Mystery investor pulls plug on Aerolux. Rumors of executive scandal." Preston felt the blood drain from his face. He looked at the window, where the clouds were peaceful and white. He was trapped in a metal tube, flying away from the fire he had just started, with absolutely no way to stop it. Then his phone rang. It was Arthur Sterling. Preston answered, his hand shaking. "Arthur? What's going on? The stock is—" "Shut up!" Arthur's voice was ice cold. "You are going to listen to me very carefully, Preston, because right now, the man you just kicked off that plane is currently dismembering this company piece by piece. Do you know who that was?" Preston swallowed hard, his throat dry. It was just some guy in a hoodie. A nobody. "That nobody," Arthur hissed, "was Ella Cross. He owns 51% of this airline, and you just declared war on him." Preston dropped the phone. It tumbled onto the expensive leather seat he had stolen. He looked out the window, but he didn't see clouds anymore. He saw his life disintegrating, and the flight still had 6 hours to go. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin of flight AL001 had shifted from one of serene luxury to a suffocating, silent tension. For Preston Holloway, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner was no longer a symbol of his status. It was a flying prison cell, traveling at 600 miles per hour, completely cut off from the world that was burning down beneath him. Preston stared at his phone screen, his thumb furiously hitting the refresh button on his brokerage app. The numbers were blurring together, a cascade of red ink that represented decades of accumulated wealth vanishing in real time. ARLX, $12.50, minus 72%. "This isn't happening," Preston muttered, his voice cracking. He was sweating now, a cold, clammy perspiration that stained the collar of his expensive Italian shirt. "This is a market manipulation. It's illegal. I can sue." He tried to dial his personal attorney, frantic to find a loophole, a scapegoat, anything. But the connection over the Atlantic Ocean was spotty. The call failed 3 times. When it finally connected, the reception was full of static, mirroring the chaos in his mind. Jerry, you have to stop trading," Preston hissed, cupping his hand over the phone, though he was loud enough that the elderly couple in row 2 glanced back with irritation. "Cross is manipulating the stock. He's dumping shares to spite me. Get an injunction. Call the SEC." Jerry's voice crackled through the speaker, sounding distant and exhausted. "Preston, I can barely hear you. Look, it's not just Cross. It's the street. The news is out. They're saying Aerolux just lost its primary credit line. The ratings agencies just downgraded the company's debt to junk status. The algorithm is flushing everything. I can't stop it. Nobody can." "My options?" Preston gasped. "What about my options?" "They're underwater, Preston. Deep underwater," Jerry said, his voice devoid of sympathy. "And there's something else. The bank just called regarding your margin account, since the collateral was mostly Aerolux stock. They're issuing an immediate margin call. You owe them $4 million by market close today, or they seize your liquid assets. The house in the Hamptons, the condo in Miami. It's all tied to the leverage." Preston felt the blood leave his extremities. His hands went numb. "They can't take the house. My wife is at the house." "Preston, listen to me," Jerry said, cutting him off. "You need to worry about more than the house. I just saw a video pop up on TMZ. Did you really call the cops on Ella Cross?" The line went dead as the plane hit a pocket of turbulence. Preston stared at the phone. A video? He frantically opened the Twitter app. The trending topics list for the United States loaded slowly, agonizingly over the satellite Wi-Fi. 1. Hashtag Aerolux meltdown. 2. Hashtag boycott Aerolux 3. Hashtag Ellacross 4. Hashtag fire Preston. Preston's trembling finger clicked on the top hashtag. The first tweet was a video with 14 million views in 2 hours. The video had been taken by a passenger in business class, just behind the curtain. It was shaky, but the audio was crystal clear. It showed Preston, red-faced and arrogant, standing over a calm Ella Cross. "I don't care if you have to put him in the cargo hold. We don't prioritize freeloaders over executives. Get him out of 1A. Then, the camera zoomed in on Ella's face as he was led away by police, followed by Preston's smug declaration, "Just keeping the skies safe." The comments below the video were a digital lynch mob. At Market Watch, Preston Halloway, VP of Aerolux, kicks majority shareholder Ella Cross off plane, stock down 70%. At Justice Seeker, 99. This is what institutional racism looks like. Suit versus hoodie. He assumed he was a nobody. Bankrupt, this guy. At Fly Safe. I'm cancelling my platinum membership with Aerolux. Disgusting behavior. Preston dropped the phone as if it burned him. He looked up. Eloise, the flight attendant he had bullied earlier, was standing at the front of the aisle. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't offering him a drink. She was holding a tablet, and she was looking at him with a mixture of pity and revulsion. She knew. Everyone knew. Preston stood up, his legs wobbly. "Eloise, I need to speak to the captain. I need to use the satellite phone in the cockpit. My cell service is terrible." Eloise took a step back, maintaining a professional distance, but her eyes were cold steel. "I'm afraid that's not possible, Mr. Holloway. The cockpit is a sterile environment during flight. Captain's orders." "I am the senior vice president," Preston shouted, his voice cracking. "I give the orders. Tell the pilot to get me a line to New York immediately." "Mr. Holloway, please lower your voice," Eloise said firmly. "You are disturbing the other passengers." "Disturbing them?" Preston laughed hysterically. "I own this airline. Actually," a voice came from seat 2. Preston spun around. A man in a sharp grey suit, who had been working quietly on a laptop, lowered his reading glasses. "I'm an analyst for Goldman Sachs," the passenger said, checking his watch. "And according to the latest ticker, Aerolux is currently trading at $6 a share. The board just announced an emergency suspension of trading. So technically, Mr. Holloway, looking at your unvested options, I believe you currently own about 0% of anything meaningful." Preston stared at the man, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Sit down, Preston," the passenger said, returning to his laptop. "You're ruining the flight." Preston collapsed back into seat 1A, the seat he had fought so hard for, the seat that cost him his life. He curled into a ball, clutching the armrests. The leather felt cold. The champagne sitting on his tray table had gone flat. He was trapped in the sky, flying toward a destination where he had no job, no money, and no reputation. And the flight still had 3 hours to go. Every minute that ticked by was another $1 million lost. He closed the window shade, trying to hide from the sun. But he couldn't hide from the truth. The karma wasn't just hitting him. It was crushing him. While Preston Holloway was hyperventilating at 35,000 feet, Ella Cross was sitting in a quiet, glass-walled conference room at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. He hadn't left the airport. He simply moved to the private aviation terminal, the one he owned. On the large screen on the wall, a Zoom call was active. 12 faces stared back at him. They were the board of directors of Aerolux, dialing in from London, New York, and Tokyo. They looked terrified. At the head of the virtual table was Arthur Sterling, the chairman. Arthur looked like he had aged 10 years in the last 3 hours. "Ella," Arthur began, his voice shaking. The board would like to formally apologize for the incident this morning. It was reprehensible. We have already drafted a statement condemning Mr. Holloway's actions." Ella leaned back in his chair, taking a sip of sparkling water. He looked fresh, calm, and utterly in control. He wore the same hoodie he had been kicked off the plane in. "An apology is nice, Arthur," Ella said softly. "But the market doesn't care about apologies. The market cares about stability. And right now, the world sees Aerolux as a company run by bigots who abuse their power and humiliate their investors. Why should I pump $2 billion into a company like that?" "We will make changes," a board member from Tokyo interjected. "We will restructure." "You certainly will," Ella said. "But I'm not just an investor anymore, am I? As of this morning's dip, I authorized my firm to buy the bottom. Cross-Grid Logistics now controls 62% of the voting shares. I don't just fund you, I own you." The silence on the call was deafening. They realized with horror that Ella had used the crash, the very crash he caused, to consolidate absolute control at a bargain price. It was a masterclass in financial warfare. "Here are my terms," Ella said, sliding a digital document onto the shared screen. 1. The financing deal goes through, saving the airline from bankruptcy. The employees keep their jobs. The pilots, the flight attendants, the mechanics, they are innocent in this. I will not let them suffer for one man's ego." Arthur let out a breath of relief. "Thank you, Ella. That is remarkably generous." 2, Ella continued, his eyes hardening. "The executive leadership team is dissolved effective immediately. Arthur, you will stay on as honorary chairman for the transition. But the rest of you? You allowed a culture where a VP felt comfortable kicking a passenger off a plane because of his skin color and his hoodie. You're all complicit. You're out." Gasps erupted on the call. "You can't just fire the whole board," one woman protested. "I own 62%, Ella reminded her. "I can do whatever I want. Resignations are due by midnight, or I terminate you for cause. Take your pick." He paused, letting the reality sink in. "And 3, Ella said, a small, cold smile playing on his lips. "Regarding Preston Holloway." "We will fire him," Arthur said quickly. "We've already prepared the paperwork. We will email it to him the moment he lands." "No," Ella said. "You won't email him. That's too easy, too impersonal." Ella leaned forward into the camera lens. "I want him met at the gate, but not by a limo driver. I want the airport police there. I'm pressing charges for harassment and making false statements to federal law enforcement officers to facilitate an illegal removal. I want him arrested the moment the cabin door opens." "Ella, that's incredibly harsh," Arthur murmured. "The press will have a field day." "The press is already having a field day, Arthur. We are just giving them the finale they want," Ella said. "Furthermore, I want his termination read to him in the terminal, in front of the passengers he delayed, in front of the crew he bullied. I want him stripped of his company credentials, his company phone, and his company credit cards right there at Heathrow Gate 4. Ella paused. "He wanted to be the center of attention," Ella said. "He wanted everyone to know he was the VIP. So let's give him the red carpet treatment. Just a different kind of red." Arthur looked at the other defeated board members. He knew there was no other choice. They had created a monster in Preston, and now they had to feed him to the wolf to save themselves. "It will be done," Arthur whispered. "Good," Ella said. "I'll be watching the live stream." Ella ended the call. He stood up and walked to the window of the private terminal. His personal Gulfstream G650 was being fueled on the tarmac. It was sleek, silver, and far faster than the commercial airliner Preston was on. Ella turned to his assistant, a sharp young woman named Chloe. "Is the jet ready?" "Yes, Mr. Cross," Chloe said. "Flight plan filed for London Heathrow. We can depart in 20 minutes. "Good," Ella said, zipping up his hoodie. "If we hurry, we can beat the Dreamliner there. I think I'd like to see Mr. Holloway's face when he lands, in person." "You're going to fly to London just to watch him get fired?" Chloe asked, surprised. Ella smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. I paid $12,000 for a first-class seat to London. Chloe, I intend to get my money's worth. The descent into London. Heathrow was usually the favourite part of the flight for Preston Holloway. He loved the view of the sprawling city, the Thames winding like a silver ribbon, and the knowledge that soon he would be chauffeured to a 5-star hotel. But today, as the Aerolux Dreamliner dipped below the cloud layer, the grey English sky looked less like a vista and more like a slab of granite pressing down on his chest. Inside the first-class cabin, the silence was absolute and terrifying. For the last 3 hours of the flight, not a single member of the cabin crew had spoken to him. They hadn't offered him a refill on his water. They hadn't cleared his tray table until the very last mandatory second. Even the other passengers seemed to have formed a silent pact to ostracize him. The Goldman Sachs analyst in 2F had periodically tapped his watch, a cruel reminder of the ticking clock on Preston's career. Preston sat rigid in seat 1A, the stolen throne that had cost him his kingdom. His hands were gripping his knees so hard his knuckles were white. He was running scenarios in his head, a desperate mental gymnastics to find a landing pad. "It's a misunderstanding," he told himself, sweat trickling down his temple. "Arthur is old." He panicked. "Once I get on the ground, I'll call the board members individually. I have dirt on half of them. I can leverage my way out of this. I just need to get to the hotel. I need Wi-Fi. I need a shower. I can fix this." The landing gear deployed with a heavy mechanical thud that vibrated through the floorboards. To Preston, it sounded like a prison cell door slamming shut. "Cabin crew, take your seats for landing." The pilot's voice came over the intercom. There was no warmth in the tone, none of the usual, "We hope you enjoyed your flight" pleasantries. Just a cold, functional command. The wheels touched the tarmac with a screech of burning rubber. The reverse thrusters roared, slowing the massive beast down. As the plane taxied toward the terminal, Preston unbuckled his seatbelt before the light went off. He needed to be the first one off. He needed to control the narrative before the rest of the passengers could upload their videos to the terminal Wi-Fi. The plane shuddered to a halt at the gate. The fasten seatbelt sign dinged off. Preston shot up from his seat. He grabbed his heavy leather bag from the overhead bin, swinging it recklessly and nearly hitting the elderly woman in row 2. He didn't apologize. "Excuse me, coming through?" Preston barked, pushing past Eloise, who was standing by the cockpit door. Eloise didn't move out of his way. She stood her ground, forcing him to squeeze awkwardly past her. She looked him dead in the eye, her expression unreadable, devoid of the fear she had shown 7 hours ago. "Goodbye, Mr. Holloway," she said. It sounded like a curse. Preston ignored her and stepped into the jet bridge. The cool, damp air of the tunnel hit his face. He walked fast, his footsteps echoing on the metal ramp. He rehearsed his opening line for the ground staff. "Get me the VIP transport. No delays." He burst out of the tunnel and into the bright, fluorescent glare of Terminal 5's arrival gate. He stopped. The air left his lungs in a sharp wheeze. There was no VIP driver holding a placard with his name. There was no smiling concierge. Instead, the area immediately outside the gate had been cordoned off by retractable belt barriers, creating a small, isolated arena. Waiting for him inside that arena was a reception committee that made his blood run cold. 3 officers from the Metropolitan Police stood in a triangle formation, their high-vis vests bright and imposing. Their hands rested near their belts, their postures rigid. Standing next to them was Mrs. Gable, the Aerolux station manager for Heathrow. Preston knew her. She was a woman who smiled even when flights were cancelled. She wasn't smiling now. She held a clipboard like a weapon. And behind them all, leaning casually against a structural pillar with his ankles crossed, was a figure in a charcoal grey hoodie. He was sipping a double espresso from a paper cup, looking as relaxed as a tourist on holiday. Ella Cross. Preston blinked, his brain refusing to process the visual data. He looked back at the jet bridge, then back at Ella. "No," Preston whispered, his voice trembling. "That's impossible. I left you in New York. You were at the gate. I saw you." Ella took a slow sip of his coffee, lowered the cup, and checked his cheap digital watch. "Physics is a cruel mistress, isn't it, Preston?" Ella's voice was calm, carrying easily over the murmur of the disembarking passengers who were now piling up behind Preston, watching the scene unfold. "You flew commercial, Mach 0.85. Headwinds over the Atlantic were strong today. My Gulfstream G650ER cruises at Mach 0.925 and flies above the weather. I landed 45 minutes ago, cleared customs, had a shower, and even had time to grab a coffee. I wanted to be here to welcome you personally." Preston's face flushed a deep, violent crimson. He turned to Mrs. Gable, deciding to attack before he was attacked. "Gable, what is this?" he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Ella. "This man is a stalker. He's followed me across the ocean. I want him removed from the airport immediately, and get these police officers out of my way. I have a meeting in the city in an hour." Mrs. Gable stepped forward. She didn't flinch at his shouting. In fact, she seemed to grow taller. "Mr. Halloway," she said, her voice projecting clearly so the crowd of passengers behind him and the dozens of onlookers in the waiting area could hear every word. "I have just received a digitally signed directive from the board of directors. Effective immediately, your employment with Aerolux is terminated with cause." The words hung in the air like smoke. The crowd behind Preston began to whisper. Phones were raised. The red recording lights were blinking. "Terminated," Preston laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "You can't fire me. I'm a senior vice president. I have a contract with a golden parachute clause. If you fire me, you owe me $10 million. "You have no contract," Ella interrupted, stepping off the pillar and walking slowly toward the cordon. "Not anymore. The cause for your termination is gross misconduct, filing a false federal report, and causing imminent reputational damage to the brand. That voids your severance. It voids your stock options. It voids your pension." "Who do you think you are?" Preston screamed, lunging toward the barrier. The police officers stepped forward instantly, blocking his path with a wall of authority. "You're a nobody. You're a hacker. A fraud." "I am the owner," Ella said softly. The volume of his voice dropped, but the intensity skyrocketed. "As of 4 p.m. New York time, Cross-Grid Logistics holds a controlling supermajority of Aerolux stock. This is my airline, Preston, my planes, my terminals, my employees, and you are trespassing." Preston looked around wildly. He saw the faces of the passengers he had delayed. He saw the sneer on the Goldman Sachs analyst's face. He saw the cold judgment in the eyes of the police. "Officers," Preston pleaded, pivoting to the police sergeant. "You can't let him do this. This is harassment. I am a U.S. citizen." The sergeant, a tall man with a thick beard, shook his head. "Mr. Halloway, we aren't here for him. We're here for you." The sergeant pulled a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. "Preston Halloway," the sergeant recited. We have received a provisional extradition request from the United States Department of Justice regarding an incident involving the falsification of a security threat aboard a commercial aircraft. You are under arrest." "Arrest?" Preston squeaked. The fight drained out of him instantly. His knees buckled, and he grabbed the belt barrier to stop himself from falling. No, please. It was a joke. It was a misunderstanding. I just wanted the seat." "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," the sergeant ordered. Preston sobbed openly now, a pathetic sound that echoed in the terminal. He turned around slowly. The metal cuffs ratcheted shut on his wrists. Click, click, click. Mrs. Gable stepped forward again. "Mr. Holloway, per company policy for terminated employees, I need to collect all corporate property immediately." She held out her hand. "Your security badge, your corporate phone, your corporate Platinum American Express." I can't reach them," Preston wept. The sergeant nodded to a constable who reached into Preston's suit pocket. He pulled out the badge, Preston's symbol of power, and handed it to Mrs. Gable. Then the phone, then the heavy metal credit card. "You're leaving me with nothing?" Preston wailed. "How am I supposed to get home? My accounts are frozen. You froze them." Ella walked right up to the barrier, standing inches from Preston. He looked down at the sobbing man with eyes that were not angry, but pitiful. "You have a return ticket, Preston," Ella said. "I checked, but since you are no longer an employee or a VIP, and your credit is declined, your first-class ticket has been voided." Ella reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a printed boarding pass. He tucked it into Preston's breast pocket. "Economy. Middle seat. Row 48, right next to the lavatory. The flight leaves in 6 hours. I suggest you get comfortable." Preston stared at him, his face streaked with tears and snot. "You ruined my life over a seat. You destroyed me." Ella shook his head. "I didn't destroy you, Preston. You destroyed yourself the moment you decided that your comfort was worth more than another man's dignity. You looked at me and saw a hoodie. You saw skin color. You saw someone you could crush. You didn't bother to ask who I was. You didn't bother to check if the kid in 1A had built the infrastructure that allows your planes to fly." Ella leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that cut through Preston's soul. "And just so you know, the margin call on your portfolio triggered a default clause on your mortgages. My real estate holding company bought the debt an hour ago. We're foreclosing on the Hamptons house tomorrow morning. Your wife has already been notified. She's packing." Preston's eyes rolled back in his head. His legs gave way completely. The two constables had to hook him under the armpits to keep him from hitting the floor. He was a weeping, broken mess, suspended between the officers like a wet towel. "Get him out of here," Ella said, turning his back. As the police dragged Preston Holloway away, his Italian shoes dragging uselessly on the linoleum, the crowd of passengers erupted. It started as a slow clap from the back, then swelled into a roar of applause. The Goldman Sachs analyst let out a loud, "Bravo!" Eloise, the flight attendant, had been watching from the doorway of the jet bridge. She looked at Ella, hesitancy in her posture. She adjusted her scarf and walked over. "Mr. Cross?" she asked softly. Ella turned. The hardness in his eyes vanished, replaced by a genuine warmth. "Eloise, I apologize for the drama on your flight. I know that wasn't easy." I just wanted to apologize," Eloise said, her voice shaking slightly. "I should have stopped him. I should have stood up for you. I was just so afraid of losing my job. Ella smiled. Courage is hard when your livelihood is on the line. I don't blame you, Eloise. But we're going to change the culture here. No more bullies. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. It was thick, matte black, with gold embossing. I just got off the phone with the new CEO. We are creating a role, Director of Crew Advocacy. We need someone who understands what it's like on the front lines. Someone to ensure that no crew member is ever forced to choose between their integrity and their paycheck again. The job is yours if you want it. Eloise stared at the card, her eyes widening. Me? But I've only been here 2 years. Experience is measured in character, not years, Ella said. You apologized when you didn't have to. That tells me everything I need to know. Call that number on Monday. Eloise clutched the card to her chest, tears springing to her eyes. Thank you. Thank you so much. Ella nodded. He pulled his hood up, picked up his battered backpack, and turned toward the exit. The crowd parted for him, like the Red Sea, watching in awe as the hoodie billionaire walked away. He didn't head for a limousine. He didn't head for a helicopter. He walked straight toward the signs for the Heathrow Express train. As he stepped onto the escalator, he took out his phone and saw the stock ticker for Aerolux. It had stabilized. It was creeping back up. The cancer had been cut out. The healing could begin. Ella Cross disappeared into the London crowd, invisible once again, leaving behind a legend that would be told in break rooms and boardrooms for decades to come. And that is the story of how Preston Holloway flew too close to the sun and got burned by a man in a hoodie. It serves as a brutal lesson for anyone who thinks their title gives them the right to mistreat others. Preston lost his job, his fortune, and his freedom because he judged a book by its cover, never realizing that the man he was bullying owned the library. In the end, true power isn't about shouting the loudest or wearing the most expensive suit. It's about character, integrity, and the quiet capability to set things right. If you enjoyed this story of high-altitude justice, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs a reminder to be humble. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.